Hi, this is Kylie Koo. Welcome to my studio. So this is part 3 in my Boho Journal series, and in this video I will be making a fabric journal cover. So for the fabric journal I had thought about a couple of different ways, and I'd got these two pieces of felt that are just slightly bigger than A4 size, and I thought that together they might make a nice cover. However, I do go on and change my mind about that. So one was lavender colour, the other turquoise. And at this stage I was just looking at the various pieces of fabric that I bought from Love Me Blue and looking at whether any of these would look good on the cover. As I say, I do change direction a bit, but I just wanted to show you my kind of thought process at this stage. Now this actual piece of fabric is 31 centimetres by 23 centimetres, so just slightly bigger than A4, and that's 12 3/16 by 9 1/16 of an inch. So the plan with the fabric journal cover was to make it a bit more kind of traveller notebook style, but I also wanted to put a flap across it. So at this point I'm looking at just taking one piece of the kind of felt material and then cutting up other pieces of fabric from Love Me Blue into more or less squares and rectangles, and somehow adding these to the cover. Wasn't sure if I'd stitch them directly on or quite what at that stage. But you'll see me here just cutting the various pieces. So again, using the rotary cutter, again I'm falling over my words, to just cut the pieces up. The interesting thing here was I was pressing quite firmly and actually ended up putting some of the kind of fibres down and into my mat underneath. I think it's simply because, having been cutting paper, which I need to press on quite firmly, the fabric didn't take near as much pressure to cut. So you'll see that the fabrics are slightly different in terms of their weight and in terms of their texture. That one was almost a piece of, I don't know, crushed velvet, something like that. Others are more a kind of, I suppose, a sort of velour. Some had other fibres coming off that kept kind of going on to others. So, you know, all in all, quite a mix of materials here. And what I was trying to do was really to get a good variety of colours. Again, just trying to get that kind of boho shabby chic feel where in this instance nothing is really coordinated. It's thinking about using scraps, using what we have, and bringing it together into something that will be unique in the sense that there will only be one like it with the fabric put together in this particular way. So in this journal and my other little journal, and one of the things I'm meaning by boho is bringing together a kind of fusion of styles, and some of the patterns in the fabric, the papers I'm using, obviously come from other places, and it's about a celebration, I think, a fusion of those different cultures, and that's one of the things that I want to get over in this journal. So just in a moment you'll see me starting to place the pieces on my piece of felt, just trying to look for a bit of a pattern. So I want it to be random, but by the same token what I don't want to have is all of one colour together. So I do want to kind of break the colour up into little blocks rather than having one big block, and this takes a little bit of time just to kind of try and get that. Just in exactly the same way that I played about with the papers on the actual paper journal, the paper cover for the journal. And with this kind of thing, no right way, no wrong way, just about getting something that's pleasing to one's own eye. And some of these materials are lovely, they have such a lovely feel to them. I stayed away from the ones that had kind of embellishments on them at this stage because I have other plans for those. I was trying not to make this too heavy. I thought having a heavy embellished fabric would perhaps just kind of distort the cover a bit because it is obviously all fabric. So at this point, what I'm showing you is iron-on fusible interfacing fabric, and it's a lightweight. I decided this would be the best way to try and bring all those pieces together. So my intention is to iron this onto the back, and I've got a couple of still shots that I will show you in just a moment. At this point, I'm just trying to roughly judge how much I'm going to need. So I put a piece of heavy duty paper onto my ironing board so that the glue didn't stick to the cover on the board. I then laid my pieces out face down. I put my fabric over the top. I then covered with an old tea towel and then ironed, holding the iron in place for a good few seconds, checking then to make sure that it's worked. And there we have it. Now some of the material did move a bit, there were some gaps, and I kind of expected that might be the case. But what I knew I could do was to then stitch pieces in to cover those gaps. But by putting the interfacing on, it meant that I was dealing with one piece of fabric rather than lots of little pieces and trying to stitch them together. I might do it differently next time, but I'll explain a bit more about that towards the end. Here I'm just wondering again if I should add some sort of embellishment onto the front, but I actually decide at this point I won't. So I'm just looking at taking some small pieces of fabric to start to fill in those little gaps. So I can't get a good angle on my sewing machine, but I start to sew around what's there. Now the sewing machine for both this and for the paper journal is really optional. It could just all be glued into place. I just wanted to do this, but I want to say I am a novice when it comes to the sewing machine. I quite enjoy using it, but it's not something that I use a lot, and I really only use it for kind of crafts. I've probably stitched more paper than I have ever stitched fabric. But there you see, just doing a kind of zigzag stitch, all a bit wonky, but that's okay. So at this point I'd gone round most of it, and now I'm actually just looking at patching in some little pieces. That silver piece of fabric that's down there kept confusing me because when the light was hitting it, I thought it was seeing right through to the fusible interfacing, but in fact it was just the silver fabric. So you'll see me here just cutting some kind of smaller pieces, slithers almost, just where I want to add it in. And I ended up with quite a few of these. But again, you know, I just think it all adds to the kind of interest in the journal. So I'm quite happy with that. So placing these on, just looking at where I'll need to stitch it. And I decide here that I'm going to take this metallic thread and hand sew them. Now it's an embroidery thread, and this does not actually work as planned. And I've left this in because I think it's important to show the things that don't go as well as the things that go right. And a lot of what I'm doing with this journal is experimenting. You know, I've made fabric journal covers before, but not this way. So it's only by trying some of these things that you actually find out whether or not they work. So I really like this thread. I was really hoping it would look good. I felt that something metallic looking on here with just those kind of little hints of the kind of gold would actually look pretty good. So here I am starting to stitch. Now, I am not an expert at sewing of any kind, machine sewing or hand sewing, but I do actually quite enjoy putting some stitches onto things. I quite enjoy doing it on my art journals, and I'm kind of doing that more and more these days. So I thought this would be quite good just doing it on here. And I'm just doing a very simple running stitch at this point. Just gathering it up, trying to collect a few stitches at one time, and then of course I'm having to smooth it out because that piece of material is kind of puckering up. So got that done. The gold's not showing terribly well, but it can be seen. And I then start on my next piece, and I start to feel the thread pulling all the time. And then I realise that what's happening is, oh, here I tried to do a bit of a back stitch. I was just trying to do something a little bit different. But I started to realise that my thread was separating. And I guess the kind of, I don't know, metallic part of it, I'm not sure which bit of it, was actually pulling back on the thread as I went through the material. So it was separating, and what I was being left with was mainly black thread with all the kind of metallic towards the bottom. So if you use these kind of threads in embroidery, I'd love to know if there's a way to get round that. It may just have been that the fabric was too thick. I don't know. It was a shame it didn't work out. I will maybe experiment with it on other things. So at that point I decided that I would just have to resort to actually machine stitching those pieces in. I do end up with it being a little bit kind of puckered in places. I didn't pin it down, I didn't tack it down. I just wanted to get it done and was prepared to kind of live with how it turned out. I was switching between covers. I was working on both at the same time, so that's why this little piece is actually still in here. Meantime, off camera, I was stitching the other journal, and you'll see that in just a moment. So here we go, that's the other side, that's the wrong side of it, and you'll see that because I'd run out of black thread, I had to introduce another thread, and actually I really like this thread, and if I was doing another one I might use that thread in its entirety. It was multicoloured and I think goes very well with this. So what I also decided to do was to put a bit of the interfacing on the back of that felt. I felt that it would just make it a little bit more sturdy and might help the two sides to bond together better. I'm also looking at adding a couple of little pockets at this stage to the inside of the journal. Looking here at which bit I want to be the main side and which bit I want to be the kind of flap. So looking at what way round I want to put that. I had also put a bit of the interfacing on the back of those two little bits, and I think if I was doing this journal again I might put interface on each individual piece of fabric before I then attach it to another piece of interfacing, because it might just give a better finish. It would give each individual piece a little bit more, make it a little bit more sturdy and perhaps easier to work with. I had been going to glue both pieces together, but in the end I just decided to use some sticky tape because I was quite keen to get this finished. And if I'd used glue I would have wanted to leave it dry overnight before machining it. So really all I needed was to hold the two pieces in place to allow me to cut round the edges of what will become the top piece, and then to stitch round the external edges, the outside edges. So this took me a couple of minutes to get it into place. The benefit of the sticky tape was I was able to keep lifting it and moving it. I knew that I was going to have excess from that other bit. Here I just remembered that I wanted to put a closure onto this and to sew this in. So just trying to make certain that I'm going to get this in the right place, trying to smooth that out a bit. I did think about ironing it, but again I was taking shortcuts, so I didn't bother. So you'll see me lay this in place. I lift it a couple of times. Those pockets, by the way, I did not finish off the top of them, so they might fray a little bit, but that's okay. Just trying this again, stretching what will become the top piece, but it's currently on the bottom, just stretching it out from time to time, making sure that it's not going to be too ruffled, making sure on the corners that I can't see the lavender fabric, and I've got to do this a couple of times just to line it up. It was slightly frustrating doing this, but I knew that if I just worked away at it, I would eventually get it to the point where it was going to be fine. Smoothing it out, and as I say, this is where there was the benefit of using the double-sided tape. It allowed me to do that. So at this point I'm just going to cut along the edges to take off the excess fabric from what will be the top of the cover. And just using the rotary tool and the ruler just makes a nice clean cut. Now some of these fabrics might actually end up fraying on the edge. If they do so, that's fine. I didn't turn anything in. Again, this was about keeping it that kind of shabby chic way. So here I am back at the sewing machine, looking at how much of my ribbon that I need. And what I'm able to do here is just to lift that edge and to push that in. And I know that I'll catch that then when I'm sewing round it. So there we go. I sewed from that side this time because I thought it would look nice against the lavender colour. And all in all, I'm pretty pleased with the way this turned out. So I hope you've enjoyed seeing this second cover. The next part I'll be working on painted papers for the inside of the journal. Now I've also created a playlist, and that's available if you want to watch from the very beginning. So thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.